Christ. Be a fool for Christ. Why not? So the disciples' voices speak. They do not know the language they speak, though. Nothing is apparently lost, though, in the translation, as the Holy Spirit had taken control for itself, even if the disciples wanted to add their own flavor to the story. It was out of their control. The Jesus story somehow lives on. There are so many voices in our church, in any church. By the church, I mean the universal church. We have the Catholics and the Orthodox, the Baptist and the Presbyterian, the Methodist and the Lutheran, UCC, American Methodist Episcopal, Wesleyan, non-denominational. Do you ever wonder whose voice is the true voice of God? And then there are so many voices within each congregation. Whose voice speaks for a congregation and its faith? Is it the minister? Is it the congregation? As humans, we like to think that we have total control over our environment and our lives. We continue to try to exert control, not only over our own lives, but over the lives of others also. It's a human trait to oftentimes to try to dominate or to control others. Only God knows why we do this. And the instant we find ourselves in a position that we thought was enviable in control, we find ourselves beset with all the problems trying to maintain control. Long ago, I learned to give up that desire to control and to allow the Holy Spirit to control over my life. I believe I was supposed to be doing other things in life. I tried teaching. I tried sales. I was even a bill collector for 5 years. Though I had limited success at some of these things, the Holy Spirit kept bouncing me right back to the church. I didn't want to be a minister. I knew what being a minister was going to be like. Odd hours, being in a place of leadership with questioned authority often, walking around with a target on my back. But the Holy Spirit refused to let up on me. Eventually, the Holy Spirit won. I had nowhere to turn. So there are already so many voices in the church. Some tell us to go this way, and the others tell us to go that way. And some say, you're saved if you do this. And others say, you're saved if you do that. Or we're told, do it the right way. Or go on the highway. What if the one thing that we concentrated on, the one voice we listened to, wanted us to move in a direction that spoke to the words that Jesus spoke? What it would be like to be so moved that we could not help but to speak the word, to live the word, to be the word. Perhaps you already have lived through this experience in your life. Have you ever found that you could not avoid doing something? No matter how hard you tried, no matter how long you put it off, for some reason you were driven to do some deed for God that you had been seriously afraid to do before, that you didn't want to do, or simply thought it wouldn't be important enough to warrant your attention? My wife Suzanne has a quote from Eleanor Roosevelt displayed in the office. It says, "You must do the thing you think you cannot do." What voices do we listen to in our lives? Are they voices that tell us to do the safe thing, the thing that others will not judge us upon? Are they the things that allow us to stay risk-free? Are they the voices that bid us to discard all pursuits other than the pursuit of wealth or notoriety? I want to tell you a story about a guy who heard a voice. He's a businessman, and he walked into the bar after a long day at the office. He sat down, he ordered a drink, and he grabbed a handful of peanuts from the bowl on the counter. He takes his first sip of the drink. He hears a voice. Hey, that's a beautiful tie. Is it silk? The women must love you. Wondering who would make such a strange comment at the bar. He looks around and he doesn't see anyone near him. Anyone who could have possibly been speaking to him. And with a shrug, he takes another sip of his drink and he sucks down the rest of it, has a few more peanuts, and orders another drink. Next he hears a voice say, "Hey, those shoes are styling, my man. Are those Italian leather? They look great." He whirls around again to see no one there. And he glances nervously around and then down at his shoes. Of course, he self-consciously tucks them under the stool so no one can see him. A little weirded out, he grabs another handful of peanuts and he orders a third drink. Now this time, the voice continues with, "Hey, that suit's fantastic. Is it Armani? You are so GQ." Well, he immediately calls the bartender finally over and he says, "Look, I keep hearing these voices telling me how great my tie, my shoes, my suit is. What is up with that? Am I going crazy?" And the bartender says, "Oh," very nonchalantly he replies, "Those are just peanuts." He's, "What, peanuts?" He looks at the bowl beside him and the bartender says, "Yeah, they're complimentary." I should have worn my nose for that. By that Pentecostal moment, the disciples knew exactly what the risks were if they were to speak the word. They were locked away in a house, most likely fearful of being identified as one of Jesus' friends. And within their own hearts, they also had the personal shame of abandoning him also. The disciples were cowering, they were hiding, they were refusing to face the world, not only because of who they were associated with, but with what they had been taught. They couldn't hide for long. But they were about to experience they had no control over. And after the Pentecost moment, they would have no fear. As they were about to be exposed for who they were and for what they stood. Now, for the disciples living the Jesus way, it was very likely a death sentence. I doubt any of us fear a death sentence if we were to talk about Jesus out on the street. For most of us, telling the Jesus story is a fearful thing to do because we're so image conscious. We don't want to be seen as someone too religious, and we just don't talk faith at all sometimes. But for these poor souls, death was a more likely scenario. They had real reason not to share their faith with anyone. And then comes along the Holy Spirit. And the word can no longer be suppressed. It was, as one reported observer said, as if they were drunk, filled with new wine. The word just poured out of their mouth. The other day I was trying to live up to my resolution to work on my garden at least a couple more hours every week. And the few times that I did get out in previous years, I would try to identify, of course, what was a weed at times and what was not. Because every once in a while I can't tell. I don't remember what I put in there. Now there's a certain weed, and I'm sure you've had it or one like it in your garden. It's prodigious, it's quickly overpowering, it grows tall, and as the new leaves are forming, sometimes it fools you into thinking that it's a valuable plant. In the first few years, I had no clue with some of these weeds. I reached down, though, now, and I ripped those right out. A weed is an interesting thing. It grows even where it isn't wanted. Though I caught on to that weed over the years and tore a few out and came back this year with some strength. And though I have worked on those weeds in the spring, as the spring has progressed, they return nonetheless. It's as if the weed has a force behind it that drives it to produce. And no matter what the circumstance, another one pops up and does its best to propagate. I wonder what it would be like for all of us to be more like a weed when it became time to talk about Jesus. I don't expect any of us to go out into the world and begin preaching to our friends and family in different languages, although it might be easier because they won't understand. Doing things in places that you're not welcome, it's probably not good for us, not good for others, and maybe even not good for the gospel. But what would it be like if we opened our hearts and our lives to the power of the Holy Spirit? Like a weed, we could be so conscious of where we grew, or would we be so conscious of where we would grow? Or would we ever give up telling or living the Jesus story? I wonder, being like a weed. So what voice leads us in our Christian life? What powers us? What voice do we hear, or what do others hear, though, maybe when we speak? In our voices, do people recognize the Jesus story, or is it our safe and risk-free story? Which one is it? Pray that our many voices speak to one story, one word, which Jesus lived and died to tell. May love be our word, and may love be our action. And yes, you may have to be a fool for Christ, but it opens up people's hearts. It really does. And I pray it has opened yours. Friends, may the Lord be with you.